Hello, everyone. Welcome to Download, where we bring you discussion analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Monday, July 24th, 2023. I'm Brad Eli with my two hosts, Simon and Christine. And joining us today in the fourth chair, Trey Brock. Hey, Trey.
How's it going, guys? How's it going, Brad?
First time we've been on the Download together, I believe. And depending on how you do today, hope it won't be your last time together. So back on Thursday, Church Militant spearheaded a day of events in Washington, D.C. under the banner Defund the Bishops. CM and 9 other groups formed the Deposit of Faith Coalition, calling for the government to stop giving the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars every single year. Christine, you were there. Can you inform, first of all, straight off the bat, what the purpose was for this rally? Just nutshell, what was the purpose for the rally?
Right. Well, we have to clarify first, there was a public prayer rally. The public was able to attend, and we had about 24 people show up, which is a decent amount of people in the middle of D.C., in the middle of the day on such short notice. But we were there to pray specifically for the conversion of the USCCB. It was interesting going there because I've been reporting on the USCCB for so many years. It was kind of strange to actually be standing right there in front of the big sign, in front of the big building, and all that stuff. And as you know, they sent a bunch of armed security and police, and I think there was a helicopter as well.
You look dangerous.
Exactly.
So that's why.
But Jesse Romero, our friend at Virgin Most Powerful Radio, he led the prayers along with Michael Hitchborn. And we prayed the rosary, but there were many, many, many prayers we prayed after as well, like Litany to the Precious Blood and Litany to the Sacred Heart. And I mean, many, they're very powerful spiritual warfare prayers. But after that, we had the actual press conference. It wasn't a conference, it was a press conference held at the National Press Club, which has been around for about 100 years, very prestigious organization. It's an association for members of the press, and we had seats set up in the front specifically for a lot of media to come. Most of them were conservative secular media, but we had some that were not so conservative, Religion News Service. I'd say it was pretty well attended. Trey was very involved in making sure that we had a media presence there. We had the 4 speakers, but the overarching point is this. There is no other Catholic media organization out there doing this sort of thing, getting this information about the USCCB in front of conservative secular media, because most of these guys have no idea about any of this. It was interesting how many interviews Michael Voris did where he was giving the stats about the USCCB, the fact that it's not a religious organization, but rather more of a political lobbying arm, how many billions they get from the federal government. And I think every single person was like, really? Wow, I had no idea. And it's really important that we have this sort of thing, this conversation with secular media to drive the conversation from the Catholic point of view. Because quite frankly, pretty much all the other Catholic organizations are hosting conferences where either they're talking about things of the faith that are important for preaching the choir, that sort of thing, or they're hosting conferences how bad the Pope is, like constantly going on and on about Pope Francis. And it's like, okay, fine, you can talk about that all you want, but that's not really going to affect the narrative in the wider public sphere, and that's why this particular press conference was so important.
Now, before we move on to the metric on how well we did there and the ball that's being moved, Simon, we couldn't help but notice when we were covering the event that we're in the meat grinder. We're making the sausage every day. We're viewing all this stuff. So all of these talking points were very familiar to us, familiar to many of our loyal followers for over the years. We've reported on all these things. Back to Christine's point, we're one of the only organizations that actually cover all these points, get into all this nitty-gritty, because the lapdog media, Catholic, won't do it. Secular media is completely oblivious to it. So did you want to comment on that for a minute about how Yeah, it's like, well, duh, of course all these.
Well, yeah, it is interesting. So Christine's talking, we had like a couple dozen people turning up in Washington, D.C. I'm kind of reminded of like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like, can you find, 10 honest men? Can you find 24 people to actually pray authentically in Washington, D.C.? And apparently you can, which I think that's got to count as a miracle, right? I mean, there's some saint out there, some guy who's dead, he needs a miracle. We can ascribe that to him, I'm sure, because we actually got people to turn up in Washington, D.C. and pray. Which is obviously, but all jokes aside, the event, wonderful for those people to have turned up, absolutely wonderful. We absolutely, really love their support. Their support is tremendous. Obviously, the spiritual warfare that went on there of great value. But really, the event as a whole, obviously the focus, was the press conference event. And that really wasn't for our audience. If you're watching this right now on Church Militant, and assuming this hasn't sort of gone viral and thrown around the world, if you're watching this on Church Militant, the press conference was not really for you because you already know it. You've heard us say it a dozen times before. The important thing, as Christine said, was to get the media, the secular media, to see these issues and see it really from a secular perspective, which is why, yes, we had the four speakers and they did talk about things kind of from a Christian perspective, but the important facts, the important piece of information that they presented were putting these issues within the context of this is anti-American, this is against the Republic, this is bad in that sense. This is not just, something those crazy Catholics don't like. This is something that is objectively bad, and the bishops are doing this. The bishops are working against America, they're working against freedom, they're working against Western civilization in that sense. I think it's actually probably really, really good if we just take a couple of minutes and we actually listen to some of the speakers, and so we've got a little kind of supercut here of kind of the best parts of the speakers. Let's listen to that right now.
The Christian view brings prosperity, brings freedom, and brings prosperity. And the Catholic bishops are now standing directly in opposition to that view. They are standing with the Marxists. They are backing the climate change extremists.
But if you are a politically active group or a political side of a government, and you are the government and you want to be able to use your power to keep ideas from being heard, to keep ideas from entering the marketplace of ideas, wouldn't it be nice to add another thing to that list of things that aren't speech? And so you're seeing around the world, and especially through around the states in this republic, attempts to add laws that regulate so-called hate speech.
The International Organization of Migration, or IOM, is the UN's immigration arm. The IOM website proudly boasts their affiliation with Catholic organizations and operate in the Vatican City state. The IOM champions the Global Compact of Migration and the International Compact for, quote, safe, orderly, and regular migration. Safe and orderly. Sound familiar? Mayorkas sure does like to plagiarize.
The Second Amendment protects our ability to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It secures our ability to secure ourselves and our neighbors. It's unreasonable for anyone to think that the religious and moral men who fasted and prayed and deliberated for months would ever expect that any American would accept being hamstrung by law to disobey the command to love your neighbor as yourself. If we would use arms to protect ourselves, then according to the second greatest command, that makes us duty-bound to do the same to protect our neighbors.
Yeah, so four great speakers there talking about, these issues that are the ones that the bishops are engaged in. And of course, discerning viewers will note we didn't really talk anything in there about abortion, about homosexuality, about contraception. We didn't talk about those issues, and it's not that those issues are not important. It's not that the bishops are kind of very silent at best on the pro-life issue, or that they seem to be, more than silent on contraception and homosexuality. It's that those issues are not of interest to the secular media, and they're just not. And it would have been essentially, like you said, Christine, it's kind of preaching to the choir, except that we would have gone and been preaching to a group of media people who would have gone, yeah, okay, this is just some Catholic thing. We don't want to be engaging with it. This isn't important. So that's why we chose those subjects that we did, because they are not just anti-Catholic, but they are anti-American. And so the conservative media, the secular media, is now aware of this information, is hopefully going to go take it out to other people. Yeah, the fact that the USCCB, you would think, well, that's a bunch of bishops, right? Well, you go to the parking lot and all the staffers there, we had one of our viewers write in about this, in 2012, bumper stickers during that presidential election, almost all of them were Democrat. So all these people are glad hanging with the Democrats, using their talking points, and that's the bureaucratic sausage maker there that's going on there every single day. Those are the people, personnel is policy. They're the ones involved with that. And that's what we're trying to get to say, hey, it's one of the U.S. bishops
title, logo, placard, but all these people are Democrats there. Democrats kill babies, and it goes downhill from there.
I've confirmed that, speaking to someone who used to work at the USCCB, working with the high-level top officials, including the president. I can't obviously reveal who this person is. I'm going to use the gender-neutral pronoun of they so that I protect this person's identity. But they confirmed to me that the most neglected office in the USCCB was the pro-life office, that almost everyone there was a Democrat, and that all they ever talked about was immigration. Why? Well, money's the bottom line. Ashina Rodriguez was one of the people who talked about the complicity of the U.S. bishops, Catholic Charities in facilitating this human trafficking at the border because of so much money that we're getting there.
So we're talking about the USCCB as an entity being a lobbying arm of the Democratic Party. We're talking about the USCCB as a bureaucratic body having a very anti-American agenda. Turn in your gas stoves, turn in your gas cars, turn in your guns, allow the children at the border to be turned over to Catholic Charities. Are going to take them to God knows where. 85,000 of them missing, I believe, was Rodriguez's position. All on federal taxpayer dollars to the tune of about $3 billion in the last 20 years. So we're trying to get that message to the secular media in hopes that they won't have the bias that the Catholic lapdog media has in order to promote that message and get the word out, because we're only so big of our platform. Our bullhorns are only so big. So the metric then is how well the message is getting picked up, who's picking up the ball, and who's running with it. Trey, can you give our viewers a little bit of inside scoop on that?
Yeah, so we had about 15 organizations or journalists who either were live streaming the event or they were there in person. Just to name a few: Institute for Sound Public Policy, Center for Immigration Studies, Media Research Center had a team of 4 people there interviewing not just Michael, but the 4 speakers that we had. Epic Times was watching it online. Washington Times was watching it online. And as we know, Epic Times wrote a nice article. And so there's about 15 organizations that were there making their presence known. And as you mentioned earlier, Simon, a lot of these people don't know the connection between the bishops and this kind of what we were talking about, defund the bishops or defund the religious left, as we were calling it. They don't know they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars from the U.S. government. And so what we did, all of the media that were there, we had a press kit for them. And they had like 10 articles, I think it was, that laid all that out for them. So they could just, they didn't have to listen to us. They could just read it. It was in their press kit. And so we had a good presence there from the media. And right after the press conference, Michael did an interview with One American News Network. So that'll go out. I believe it's going to go out this weekend. So there was a lot of coverage, not just the day of or the day after, but it's still something that's hopefully going to be talked about a little bit more as the week goes on.
So in print, we have PJ Media, Epic Times, I think Washington Times, you said, was going to be coming out with a print story here shortly. And how many interviews then with Voris have the secular media lined up with, conducted and yet to be conducted?
I think there was about 4 or maybe 5 or 6 before the press conference, and then there's going to be about 5 or 6 more lined up this week as well, kind of keeping the buzz going about what we did on Thursday.
Well, that's
right, and of course he was with Steve Bannon, so that was
right. Yeah.
And then InfoWars, he was also in InfoWars, so that was pretty big. But I think Michael's opening remarks at the press conference are important for people to listen to, because because a lot of Catholics still out there still don't understand the distinction between the USCCB and all the U.S. bishops. And a lot of Catholics labor under the misimpression that the USCCB actually has magisterial teaching authority and that they're actually a Catholic group with authority, where we're bound to obedience. That is not the case at all. And in fact, the Vatican has made that very clear. If you read out the history of the USCCB, it actually started back in 1917 as the National Catholic War Council. Then it morphed into the National Catholic Welfare Conference. Then later on, it combined the USCC with the NCCB. And I thought Michael made a really good analogy. The USCCB as a corporate entity is not authoritative magisterially. They don't have that authority. Like I said, the Vatican has already made that clear. It's just an Episcopal conference. And they're not a Catholic organization. They're a lobbying arm. He said it's no more Catholic than if a bunch of bishops wanted to get together and form a baseball team. you know, they could call it, you know, the U.S. Catholic Bishops baseball team, but that doesn't mean that therefore now they have official teaching authority, and each Catholic in each diocese is now bound in obedience to listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, it's interesting. You shared, Christine, before the event, you shared with, I think, myself and Brad, this great article that I immediately passed to Dave Nussman, our download producer, and said, we need to do a show on this. So I'm going to keep talking about this until we do a show on this, because it was really good. But the article was, as you say, it was the history of the USCCB, and obviously you've touched on some of it there. But yeah, this was this long history that I didn't know, and as well, multiple rulings from the Vatican, and not just kind of like, yeah, you know, like some dude in the Vatican, you know, third Monsignor on the West Corridor or something says something, but no, like from official like arms of the Vatican that have the official cachet to say this. So like, hey, don't be doing this. This does not have authority. I think one of the things has got to be is that people think about the UN. So you think about the United Nations, okay, and virtually every single country in the world is a member of the United Nations. And they all get together and they have votes and they pass resolutions and they do this, that, and the other. And there's a whole, you know, question, you know, of like, what does the UN say? Well, okay, what the UN says and what actually means for international law are two wholly different things. In practical terms, international law is what the United States and the United Kingdom say it is, or within certain global areas, it's what China and Russia say it is. That's what it is. The UN has no actual authority, but people on the left, globalists, are all like, oh, the UN said, therefore you've got to snap too. I assure you that I do not, in just the same way as when the USCCB says something, I don't need to snap too. If my bishop says it and he says, well, hey, you know what, I'm issuing this decision, okay, does that fall within your competence, Your Excellency? Absolutely. Now it's authoritative and binding on me as something I've got to do. But do be careful, because a lot of the times the individual bishops will just say, well, the USCCB has directed. Okay, are you directing me, Your Excellency? And then, because they do not want to be caught with their hand in the cookie jar on this one, so they kind of let the USCCB run cover for them, and that's a grave evil.
And adding on to that real quick, because I remember Trevor Loudon, our first speaker, Trevor Loudon, a contributor for the Epic Times, he mentioned in his talk to kind of relate it to what we were doing as a coalition, how Bishop McElroy, now Cardinal McElroy, has made statements about how climate change needs to be the central issue. It's the preeminent issue above abortion, saying ridiculous things like that. Zoe Warren talked about how there were 3 cardinals who, to put it simply, are not in favor of the Second Amendment or guns rights. And so even things like that, you say something stupid, a bishop, you know, on his own says something ridiculous like that, that obviously doesn't bind on the conscience of the faithful. But just kind of they were mentioning those things, and when I was speaking to the media or to the speakers or to all of the people who were there, it's really, really tricky, because you have to, if somebody's asking, you know, what's this event all about, if they haven't, you know, if they're asking further questions about after they've read the press kit or whatever it is, you have to explain this whole thing to them. It's not just, oh, we're doing this. It's, you know, there's a million different rabbit holes that you have to go down in order to explain you know, our real message, and it's not easy. I wish it was, but because there's a million different things you have to clarify with them. So,
well, the other reason you touch on that, though, the bishops will dial it in for the people. It was Joseph Tobin of New Jersey, and he's the Cardinal. Joseph Tobin, Cardinal Dolan, Timothy Dolan of New York, and Cardinal Supich of Chicago. All 3 within the space of a few months, all saying, hey, you ought to turn in your guns. Now, they're not putting any command. I don't believe there is a command that they can actually issue that and say, you're bound to turn in your guns. It's not in their purview. It's not part of the 10 Commandments in that sense for them to do that. But this is the reason why this conference is necessary now, because things are picking up steam. We haven't had in the past cardinals saying, turn in your guns. We haven't had the massive push on the climate change agenda, where it's getting now turn in all your cars, all your gas guzzling cars, all of your even gas stoves. Massive burden on the economy to just break the economy really from being competitive on the world market because of saddled with all the climate change. Even the taxpayers. trillions of dollars legislated down the road of just dumping all this money into the who's going to spend it, scenario on climate change. So, and then the immigration with Rodriguez. I mean, when she threw the stat out there that 85,000 missing children, and these families aren't not families, just people aren't even being vetted when they say, oh, where are we going to take this kid to? And one of her points was, as one of the speakers there, that they're making even less effort to vet places where these children are going because there's so many more coming. They have to just get rid of them, just take them somewhere.
Yeah.
And the complicity of all that. So it's picking up steam, turning your guns, turning your cars, turn over your kids. And then also Wagner there speaking on the Michigan law of saying, hey, you need to hate speech in that. And no bishops are actually present. They were missing in action on that, was his point. So this is really picking up steam. It's a message that needs to go out to secular media because they're the only ones with the chops, the ability, the bullhorn to get the message out to the taxpayer, to the voter, to do something about it.
That really surprised me when I heard that, when Professor William Wagner, who's a former federal judge, when he testified before Congress, the Michigan State Congress, about why this proposed Michigan hate speech law is so dangerous and so unconstitutional, he expected at a minimum for a number of religious groups to be there, including the Michigan Catholic Conference, to take a strong stand against this because it primarily targets people of faith. If you simply offend someone of the LGBTQ community and that person feels offended subjectively, maybe you use the wrong pronoun or something, you could literally be prosecuted and put in jail over that. So it seems like the Michigan Catholic bishops should show up to the hearing and say, yes, we take a strong stand opposing this. He said, no, they didn't take a stand at all. And it's like, that's kind of the way it has been with many bishops, just MIA, missing in action. But I wanted to go back to Michael's comments at the beginning of the press conference, because he made a point to clarify that this is not an attack on the bishops. We're all faithful Catholics. We're all obedient to the magisterium. We're all Catholics in good standing. We're not trying to attack the bishops, okay? We're here to call out the corporate entity known as the USCCB because they abuse their spiritual authority by pushing these anti-American talking points and policies under the cover of spirituality in their faith. For instance, the immigration thing, as you mentioned. How many times, have we heard, we must welcome the stranger, and they're quoting scripture and saying, and if you don't do this, you're not charitable, you're not really being Catholic, if you don't welcome the stranger. Well, yeah, there are two sides of that coin. Yes, but you ought to secure your borders, protect the citizens. As you mentioned, 85,000 missing children in human trafficking. And the way this works, for those who may be unfamiliar, is that every child that comes in, every migrant child, they've got a dollar tag attached to their head. And so the particular NGO that's working to bring in the child and place it with a sponsor, they're getting thousands of dollars per child to do that. So they're like raking in hundreds of millions. And the problem is, under the Biden administration, they removed a bunch of the vetting factors required. So what happens, and this has actually happened, fake sponsors will forge a birth certificate or forge some document. They send it in. They don't have to show up in person anymore. They just email it in, mail it in, saying, here's my ties to this particular child, 8 years old. That's it. Rubber stamp it. Send the 8-year-old. And the sponsor no longer even has to show up anywhere. They used to have to show up in order, and there would be some sort of background check. Now the federal government will use your taxpayers to put that child, unaccompanied child, on a plane or a train, bus, whatever, and send them directly to the home of the would-be pedophile or the child trafficker.
How horrific.
Yes.
How horrific.
Yeah, and of course that's the issue that we've discussed here on the download. I mean, we were speaking about the movie The Sound of Freedom, which I think obviously great that this movie has come out to discuss this. I understand that it's an exceptionally good movie, just from an artistic perspective as well. It's Jim Caviezel, and he always turns in like a good solid performance. Does Jim Caviezel? He always, it doesn't matter what he's doing, he always turns in a nice solid performance. But I understand the movie is very, very good and really addresses these issues. But of course, it's not a movie. This is real life. This is a real thing that's really happening with all of these children. What is happening is the USCCB are complicit in this. And it's not just a question of saying, well, they're complicit in illegal immigration. And you go, well, no person's illegal. It's like, I assure you they are. But it's not just a question of saying, well, the USCCB wants more people to be brought in. It's like more refugees or to open it up and to allow people to. That's not the issue. The issue is that there is, as you've identified, Christine, this massive loophole and this problem which is leading to child trafficking and sexual exploitation of minors and all of these horrible treatment. Even if you say, okay, those are outlier cases, there are probably many cases where children are being placed with sponsors who are not taking really good care of them, that they're coming out from some economically difficult situation in South or Mesoamerica. They've got an economically difficult situation there, and they're coming now into a situation where they are undergoing some kind of neglect and abuse, even if it's not sexual abuse at this point. It's like, that isn't what they were promised. That's not the American dream. If you want to come along and say, hey, we want to welcome the stranger and welcome the orphan and welcome these people in, and, yeah, I'm going to be a sponsor. Okay, well, you have a duty to provide them with this decent place. And people who are taking government money and vetting people have a duty to actually vet people and actually go through and do this. And that's not happening. And the USCCB know it's not happening, but they're still participating in this thing for money.
The system is completely broken. And when we say defund the bishops, again, for Catholics out there concerned, we're not saying defund all the bishops in every single U.S. diocese. We're talking about defunding the USCCB. Now, we understand there are migrant people coming in who truly need the help, and we want them to get help. But what you don't do is you don't keep throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at a system that is completely broken. You turn that spigot off, that financial spigot off, until you fix the problems, because these children are not safe. They're completely not safe. They're at risk. They're being placed in a living hell with the help of the U.S. bishops and Catholic charities, which I just want to clear, they've received together $3 billion since over the course of 15 years, $3 billion federal taxpayer dollars. And this is what's happening. I mean, turn off the financial spigot until you fix the system.
Another one of the defund the bishops wasn't just removing the taxpayer funding, because it was even hard to do that with Planned Parenthood. It seemed like an immovable object to get that funding. Never did get removed. Even when they were selling dead baby body parts from aborted babies, for crying out loud. But the other aspect what we're pushing for was to have to fill out the 990. So the 990, some detailed accounting of where all of that $3 billion is going to. So you would know, oh, you just hired your brother's firm to be the busing company, and you hired your sister's cousin's nephew to do this, and all the nepotism, or the money didn't go anywhere. You said it all went here, and it's just sitting in some, Caribbean bank account or offshore bank account backed by gold. So the idea that, we need transparency with everything we learned since 2018. Transparency, you would think, is one thing that we learned, that we need accountability. There's no accountability without transparency. There's no transparency without a 990 form. So have them fill out a 990 form. There's no getting them to do that without the secular media really raising the stink out there, saying, where is all the money going?
Well, I mean, the 990 issue, of course, so what there is if you have a non-profit corporation, this is a real glossing overview of it, so if there are lawyers and accountants out there, obviously you can clarify it in the comments, but ultimately, if you're a non-profit, you have to file various tax forms with the government, or various forms with the government, even though in many cases you're not paying certain taxes. You have to file these taxes, and because you are a non-profit, these things become public record. So you can go and you can look up the 990s, and you can look up various other filing documents about somebody's accounting online, and the government has the websites. I think, GuideStar has a bunch of this information. That's what people do. People go up and they look at these things. That's how they discovered all of this alleged corruption within the Black Lives Matter organization. That they, and that's why people were joking and saying BLM stands for buy large mansions, because people were buying, these very nice houses apparently from it. But what happens is there is a rule within the tax code that says that churches do not need to file the 990, or certain kinds of religious organizations, which the USCCB falls under. Now, Not sure why that was originally put there in the original thing. I'm not a legislator. I'm not an accountant. I would suspect it was because the American experiment has given birth to 1,000,000,001 tiny storefront churches, and to ask this place that has like a congregation of less people than we have on this desk right now, who are using their First Amendment rights to worship God in an incorrect way, but they're using their First Amendment rights to worship God in the way they want to have them have to fill out some tax form for their little organization was seen to be onerous, was seen to be over there. But the USCCB is essentially hiding behind that. You are not a little mom and pop storefront church. You are not some, the Second Baptist Tabernacle of the Redeemer continuing in his precious blood. What you are is you are the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. You received how many $1 billion from the U.S. government?
$3 billion, and that's only from migration services.
Just
that's not
from
for everything else.
Services.
Yeah.
You've received $3 billion from migration services. The little storefront church is lucky to have some Chinese takeout in the fridge.
Oh, let me clear. Sorry, 1.1 billion, but then you combine that with Catholic Charities, which works hand in hand with the USCCB. Yeah.
So some of the guys like Trevor Loudon, he was talking, we talk about, we've been in the sausage grinder for a while. We're making the sausage all the time. We understand all these things. Well, he has too. He had a book. Trevor Loudon was the first speaker, and he spoke on climate change and the communist angle to these. He would say, you take climate change and it's green like a watermelon on the outside and break it open, it's red in the middle. He wrote a book, The Enemies Within, Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the U.S. Congress. Now, you're taking that and you're working glove in hand with the U.S. bishops, the U.S. Bishops Conference, where all these people are going back and forth between, the Capitol Hill and back to the, it's all in D.C., so back to the U.S. Bishops headquarters there. So you have all these blue stickers on their bumpers out in the parking lot, and these people all have those same communist ideals, the same communist socialist ideals. I remember Simon one time back in the day said the only difference between communist and socialist, communist wants to be your God and socialist wants to be your parent. And that's what we have, a parental top-down government that's actually continually getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And the bishops are actually working with that. And we call it the Deposit of Faith Coalition that was spearheading this movement, because we want them to get back to what the deposit of faith, because that's the things they should be, abortion, same-sex marriage, contraception, homosexuality. Those are the issues that they should be championing and talking about and pushing and moving, but those don't pay well. So there has not been a single collection taken up on behalf of the pro-life movement since their conception in the 60s.
On your point about the top-down government, and Trevor did a good job talking about it, but I thought the best talk the whole day was Zoe Warren, and he had kind of explained that whole thing better than anybody. And I'm going to give a couple quotes because I really do think his talk was by far the best. He says, "Our rights come from our Creator, not from the will of the government, but from the will of God." And then he says, "An armed and trained American populace is a check on tyranny." And then he explained how a tyranny is basically just whenever they're trespassing on your God-given rights. And again, they're God-given, and so it's not something that the government gives you. They're given to you from God. And he talked about living your conscience. He talked about how we shouldn't be in this habit of calling the police. We should have a well-trained militia, basically just neighbors who have your back is what he was talking about. And then he got a little theological, and Zoe's he's not Catholic, but he says, I've never heard this point before. He says, Jesus told Peter to put his sword away and not give it to Caesar. I thought that was a really good point. It was really clever. And his last point, which I'll mention, which I think this is the point of what we did on Thursday. I think this is the point of the press conference. He says that I love my local law enforcement, but their job it's not necessarily to protect the people. And I didn't know this, but apparently law enforcement, they don't have the duty to protect anybody not actively in their custody. I had no idea about that. And so his point was that that's the job of the people. And he says that the reason the society is so vulnerable today, it's because it's basically saying it's your fault, it's my fault for not living this out. And I was talking to him after the conference because I was pumped up about what he's talking about, and I was explaining to him. I was like, Zoe, this is just Catholic teaching. This is the teaching on the domestic church. This is subsidiarity. This is patriarchy. This is everything the church teaches. And he was very open to that. But that whole point Obviously, we're not sitting there. We don't want to just point the finger. That's not what we do. We're not saying it's your fault. It's not our fault. And just keep pointing the finger and just make excuses. That's not what we're trying to say. The point is you take responsibility for your faith, inform your conscience with a well-formed conscience in line with the truth, and that's that highest authority. Truth is the highest authority. And I was explaining this to him because I was so excited about what he was talking about, but I think that is the essence of what we were doing. We're not sitting around saying, you know, it's your fault and just making excuses for everybody. You know, and he seemed to have the best answer to that is no, the people, the lady, I was trying to make it in Catholic terms, the lady, you know, as Bishop Sheen says, up to you, the lady. And he seemed open to that, but I thought that's why his speech was by far the best. It was amazing. It was really good.
Yeah, and I think all the points you bring up there too, or what he said, it does come back to communism, because the communist system believes they give you the rights. You know, they give you your rights, and you're simply a tool of the state. And as you mentioned, he wasn't Catholic. In fact, none of the speakers were Catholic. But you don't have to be Catholic to agree on these points. You don't have to be Catholic to understand that communism and Marxism is a serious danger to society and to the world. I mean, there is no system that has been more condemned by the church than communism. But again, you don't have to be Catholic to understand this. You know, that Zoe Warren, he didn't talk about communism, but really those are all communistic points. We want to take your guns. You don't have the right to anything unless we give you that right, and that's not true. God is the one who gives us the right to property, as the church has said. We have a right to property. We also have a right to self-defense and that sort of thing. But very quickly, at the prayer rally, I was able to interview a few people, you know, do a few interviews with some of the people who showed up, and unexpectedly, we actually had a fellow who showed up, and he's actually running for U.S. Senate in Virginia against pro-abortion Democrat Catholic Tim Kaine, who was almost vice president. But let's go ahead and play that sound bite now.
I'm here today because I think we need an independent church. Church leadership being beholden to Washington in any form, fashion is not a good thing, especially when it comes to funding. The vast majority of the corruption of the church in the past has always dealt with the corruption from the leadership in bed with the local governments. In order for us to have a strong, united church, I think we need to be free from outside influences, specifically political influences.
And so you are running for office. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm running for the United States Senate in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm running against Senator Tim Kaine, who also claims his Catholicism. I'm making my faith an issue point in this election because I think it's important for the Catholic faithful to have representatives that won't leave their faith in the car when it's time to go vote for these issues that go against our faith, our doctrine, common sense, natural law, and God's word. And so I'm fighting this battle personally because I think it's important for our country, and it's even more important for our church. This is a discussion we need to have amongst ourselves in the open, and now's the no greater time than right now.
Do you think more Catholics should get involved in politics?
I 1,000% think more Catholics should be involved in politics. The more people that I talk to, and the more communities that I get around to in the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's hard to get people of faith involved in politics because they want to see, they typically have been trained or brought up to have that separation. But what we see is that the communistic side, the Marxist side, they're not taking that same approach. They're involved in the churches. They're using their outreach into left-leaning progressive churches. And so if we don't take that same tact, if we don't be just as engaged as the other side, we're going to continue to be on the defense. And I think that Catholics are waking up to that holistically. I think we see that from our government now targeting traditional Catholics in the FBI. And so there's a movement, I believe, that is just burgeoning that's going to result in a strong Catholic turnout, a conservative, faith-filled Catholic turnout.
Yeah, I think he makes a very important point that more Catholics need to be involved in politics. We've talked about this as something that we try to promote here at Church Militant is ora et labora, pray and work. Pray as if everything depended on God, work as if everything depended on you. And that includes being involved in the political sphere in whatever way you can. I'm not saying every single Catholic out there has to, because you're not always in that position to be able to do that. If you're a mom at home with your children, you can't do that. But some people can. Some people can get involved in local politics, maybe on the state level, maybe on the federal level, like this fellow, Eddie Garcia. But elections have consequences. And we can see that by the way the Biden policies are completely destroying this, just destroying this country. And you've got the pro-LGBTQ stuff that's sexualizing young children, destroying the next generation, their innocence. So many problems. Elections have consequences, and we must, as Catholics, get involved, elect good, virtuous leaders.
And I think there's an important point that ties into the couple of things that you've both just been saying. We had Zoe talking about, and I thought his speech was extraordinarily good because he really was talking about the need for gun control in the sense of, are you in control of the guns you have? Are you well trained? Are you experienced? Are you knowledgeable? Can you use this responsibly, or have you just bought a gun and now you're thinking you're Dirty Harry? And I think that there is a wider sort of issue with that with regard to the being involved in politics. Every single person can be involved in politics. Every single person should be involved in politics. The commonest and lowest denominator for being involved in politics is in a democracy or a republic with a democratic tradition, as we have, is going out and voting whenever you get the opportunity. That's what it is. In this country, it's usually every couple of years you go out and you vote. And okay, so we go and we vote, and you got your bit of paper, and it's like, okay, so am I gonna just go and just click, for president, because I heard of that guy, and maybe the senator, and then there's a bunch of other stuff down here, and I don't know what that is. And I couldn't be bothered to take 20 minutes to learn who these people are. How many times have we heard about the school boards? And the school boards are out there, and they're made up of these people who've been voted in by like half a dozen people, because nobody bothers to turn up to vote for the school board. So there's the school board, and these people do not have anything even approaching a democratic mandate. But what they do have is they have this massive desire to go out and promote, for example, a whole bunch of LGBTQ garbage into the schools. That's why we've got all these books there. Suddenly there's all these mums up in arms. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. How did this happen? Because you stayed at home and drank white wine, Karen. That's the issue. You didn't get out there and vote on the school board because it was your kids. You're handing your children over for like 4 or 5 hours a day to these people, and you didn't go out at any point. Now, fine. Now you need to get involved. Even if you're not going to run for school board, you need to get out there and start voting on this. For the mayor, for the chief of police, all of these positions, all politics is local. Who is in the White House has much, much lesser impact than who is in your state house and who really is running your little municipality.
That's completely true. School board, I'm glad you mentioned that. School boards. And if you can't run for the school board, show up to the meetings and make your voices heard, as we've seen in these viral videos. You've got really angry moms out there, showing up and raising hell over what's happened to their children. During the midterms, we had a bunch of liberal school boards flip because these moms had it, and they're like, I'm running. And so they flipped from liberal to conservative. And we just had a story, I think it just came out in San Francisco. I can't remember exactly where, but it was a local school board. And the state school district leader came in, and he's trying to push this LGBT stuff. And the local board said, okay, your time's up. All right, time's up. They provide a counterpoint. He wants to come back, and push his whole LGBT thing again. And the local board said, your time is up. You've spoken. You're being disrespectful. They actually had him escorted out by security, which was great. And then you know what? They voted 4-1 to reject his LGBT agenda. Yeah. So this is what needs to happen all over the country.
Yeah, we know politics is downstream of culture, as Andrew Breitbart said, but that culture is downstream of religion. And that's the point that we're trying to draw here. And I believe that Eddie Garcia was pointing out that the pulpits are being co-opted, that people, the left knows that you need to get religion involved because that's the sentimentality. That's like, oh, we're doing the right thing here. That's how Tim Kaine, his opponent, always gets like, I'm Catholic. I don't know much about him, but I heard he was Catholic, therefore I'm going to vote for him. And it is very important for Catholics to get involved because they chose the president of this country for all the way back to Kennedy, except for one election. I think that was Kerry, and actually the populist vote actually went for Kerry, even though he didn't get the college. So the fact is, absolutely important to get the USCCB, this mirage that the Catholic Church is behind the Democratic Party in this country. That's what we're trying to take away, that blue mirage there, and say, no, that's not true. That what's going on, all these talking points coming out are Democratic talking points that are coming out of the USCCB. They're not standing up for any of the, you'd say, truly Catholic talking points at all. And we don't have enough voice ourselves to carry that message out to the people. And the Catholic establishment media won't, because their handlers are all part and parcel tied in with Supich and Dolan and other people, the big wigs at the USCCB. So we need the secular media involved. Trey, what does it look like for success? What would success look like for this to get, we would like to think that Thursday wasn't the end. Thursday was the beginning. And where do we move from here, and what does success look like?
I think that if everybody just watches Zoe Warren's talk, you're good. You're good. No, it's a tough question, but I think success, what success looks like, and it does relate to kind of what Zoe was talking about, a little bit about what we were talking about politics. I think success looks like everybody, not just the Catholics out there, but everybody taking responsibility for their faith and just lining their minds and lining their minds up with truth and then living it out. That's basically it. I know that's kind of broad. It sounds very ambiguous, but because politics, when you say get involved in politics, I think about it, like, what does that really look like? Like, what does that even mean? And I think that when you vote, you should be voting for somebody who's going to take power away from politics and put it into the Christian social order. I think that's what it is. And so in the meantime, I think that a win, as we were talking about, is, Christians and just Americans, whoever, you build the Christian social order. That's what it is. I think that's the win, because, and I think the point is, because when you're doing that, you're not beholden to anybody. You're not waiting around for somebody to give you the head nod to do something. You're doing it on your own. And that's what Zoe's talk was all about. He's saying this is what you can do right now. And when you do that, you're not sitting around waiting for people to tell you what to do. You're informing your Catholic conscience as properly as you can, and then you're living it out. And then you create that Christian social order. And so I think that's the win. I think that's the takeaway.
But actually, I was working here from 2014. There's two instances I can go back to in Church Militant history. 2016, the election. We, right or wrong, good or bad, got singled out by the New York Times, MSNBC, half a dozen other media, Vice and others, along with Spadaro, the Jesuit in Rome, of being problematic in that election. That they gave us some creds, negatively so, of helping to get someone who actually put 3 pro-life judges on the Supreme Court, who actually got more religious freedom and freedom of speech and freedom in general laws, undoing all of the harnessing that the Democrats had put in place for so long. And we're talking about Trump, right or wrong, good or bad, but that's what happened in 2016. We kept talking about the right and wrong in politics there and helped move the Catholic needle. And he got in. Now, whether we did or not, all I'm saying is we got a lot of bad press from the left that said, you guys are the problem. What success looked like there was us talking about that long enough that helped move the needle, at least in the eyes of the left. In 2018, the Catholic Me Too movement started off. In June, McElroy got named in a lawsuit under Dolan's watch in New York. And we kept beating the drums and beating the drums and beating the drums, and all of a sudden that snowballed into, that wasn't the Catholic lapdog media, that was Church Militant. And all of a sudden, we had more stories coming in than we could even possibly keep up with at all on a regular basis. People finding us. And that snowballed into the whole Catholic Me Too movement. That's what success looked like. It didn't end on that Tuesday in June, June 19th in 2018. And that's where the beginning. So success here would look like that the beginning of the conversation between us and secular media began on Thursday of last week and keeps getting, the vibes just keep happening. The interviews the talking points keep going out. People start saying, where is all this money going in? Why are you talking about all these Democrats? Don't you know they kill babies? They're pro-homosexual. They're all these other things that you guys aren't supposed to be. Why are you glad-handing with them? Why are you hiring all these people with blue bumper stickers?
Yeah, and I think the way that connects is that I think it's better to say that you don't spend all of your resources and all of your time doing that. I think my answer would be you spend all your time, all your resources building the Christian social order. That'd be I think that's time better spent than just talking about it. And you don't not talk about it. You don't keep your mouth shut about it. But you do put all the resources into the family, into the Christian social order. I think that's the answer.
And very quickly too, I know you mentioned Zoe Warren. I liked all of the speakers, but I took a specific interest in William Wagner because he has he's former federal judge. I've got a legal background. He's doing some great work with the Great Lakes Justice Center, trying to go against some of these hate speech laws that are being passed. Because it's not just Michigan, Colorado. He testified in Colorado, and that statute was actually struck down as unconstitutional. So the hope is that's going to happen here as well. But he's doing some great work, and like I said, none of the panelists were Catholic. But I think it's important that Catholics, Church Militant, that we partner with some of these organizations doing some really great work out there, fighting, just as you said, to create a Christian social order. That doesn't mean we compromise, where we stand. We remain uncompromising on Catholic teaching where we stand. That doesn't mean that we can't partner with some of these great organizations that, quite frankly, in some ways are acting more Catholic than many Catholics that we know.
And I think as well, there's another thing that I would say in terms of, what does winning look like? For all of the people out there who donated to support this, a winner is you. Is the internet expression at this point, because obviously this was a very expensive thing. I think the figure that I've seen bandied around on the back of an envelope, it's like $100,000, which is a huge amount of money. But obviously we saw that beautiful facility there, the National Press Club. If you want to be heard by the national press, you have to go to the National Press Club. Incredibly expensive to go to. Anyway, we went there, $100,000 for that. That's just the out-of-pocket expenses that we made there. And fortunately, we've received these very generous donations from people out there who've done that and supported us. So you've supported this. Like I said, this event wasn't for you, but this was an event put on by you. And then, of course, though, there are additional expenses that don't really come up on sort of the top half of the budget. Then there's this below half of the budget. For example, it's like Christine, I don't know how many hours and days you put in. Trey, you put we had a bunch of people there. Okay. Y'all get paid. This may be news to some people out there, but people here do get paid. And so obviously that expense, fine, it's rolled into the salary line on the budget just as generally, but those are expenses for this event. So please, if you have donated to support this event and make it possible to get that out there, to get it within the secular media, thank you so much. Your donations made that happen. You put that event on. If you haven't donated, please do. Please, you can obviously make a donation now, and it will go with regard to support this and to support everything that we've got going on there. So please.
And may we all pray that the conversation has just begun and that the needle keeps moving forward. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve. A te suspiramus gementes efflentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, ilos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, o clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.